Welcome everybody to BioStrategy Partners Practical Knowledge Series of April 2022, and I'm very glad to present to you everybody today's panel discussion on the startup location. A couple of things before we start. I want to kind of talk about BioStrategy Partners a little bit. We are a nonprofit consortium of 7 academic institutions and research institutes that are very committed to translating early stage technologies and translating them into the commercial use. We run 3 different programs, including this one, the Practical Knowledge series of panel events. And we have the Germinator program where we kind of match the academic labs to industry partners so that they can de-risk their early stage technologies. And we also have the Keystone Innovation Tax Credit programs that you can take advantage of for your startup needs. And I would like to take a brief moment to thank our sponsors, Strategy Ronan, CBRE, who we have a representative today, Mike Maloney. We also like to thank MVM Associates, Silverstein Properties, Cantor Fitzgerald, as well as University Place Associates. So thank you very much to our sponsors for allowing us to host this event and get the knowledge out there. All right. Before we start, I just wanted to take a moment to say that unfortunately one of our panelists, Anthony Mayer, had a family event, so he had to pull out of this panel discussion. We will really miss him in this discussion, but I'm sure the rest of us, Jeff, Terry, and Mike, can pick up where is needed. A couple of things before I turn it over to Mike. Please mute yourself at all times, and if you have questions, submit them in the chat, and we will leave about 20 minutes at the end. We got about 4 audience questions through the registration, but feel free to submit your questions in the chat whenever you feel like, and I'll kind of pop up if it's relevant questions during the discussion. If it's not, I'll leave it towards the end for the 20 minutes, and then we can open it up to the audience questions. So with that said, Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion on life sciences real estate. As Brian mentioned, my name is Mike Maloney, and I'm a life sciences real estate advisor with CBRE. My team and I, we specialize in representing tenants throughout the Philadelphia area and nationally with their life sciences related real estate. I have the pleasure of leading today's panel discussion. For today's call, we have Jeff Dabano, who's the Executive Vice President of Life Sciences at Brandywine Realty Trust, as well as Terry Jacobs, who's the Principal at Jacobs Wiper Architects. Both are Philadelphia-based, here to discuss the market, how to find space in the Philadelphia area, and some of the trends that we're seeing in the marketplace. Before we get started, if anyone has any questions in the audience that they would like us to ask our speakers, please drop the questions in our message box, and we'll be sure to take some time at the end to address them. So to kick things off, Jeff and Terry, why don't you guys give just a brief overview of your experience, your companies, and then we'll jump into some of the questions.
Terry, you go first.
Sure, yeah, I'm on the left side. Hey, so, good afternoon, everybody, and happy Friday, Good Friday, I guess, too. So, yeah, we're an architecture firm, about 60 people. We were founded in Philadelphia about 1981. About 70% of our work is in the life sciences. And interestingly, we do a lot of laboratory work for both the academic side, say Penn and Princeton and other colleges. We also work for a lot of startup companies that are coming out of the startup mode, and we also work for big pharma too, so that the AstraZenecas, Merck's, Sanofi's, and so forth. So in a way, we get a sort of a broad spectrum of what the industry is doing from different perspectives. And we also have an office down in North Carolina in that market and in Austin, Texas. And we're actually currently also working. One of our interesting lab projects was we did the Saudi FDA laboratory in Riyadh. So that's a long story. I can talk about designing a lab in Saudi Arabia. It's pretty interesting. So, but we love working with startup companies and helping them determine what kind of space they need and where it is and what it looks like and so forth. So it's kind of our overview. We also do tie that together with a CGMP manufacturing. in both cell and gene therapy and sterile facilities, OSD facilities. And one of the things we think is really important, we're a design firm. In the end, design matters, what your space looks like, how it works, all tied together to make a successful place to help you, fulfill your mission of growing and doing great research. So, Jeff, I'll turn it back to you. Over to you,
Sure.
or whatever. Sideways.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to be here ourselves. I work for a company by the name of Brandywine Realty Trust. We're publicly traded, New York Stock Exchange. Have about 24 million square feet in 3 major markets: Philadelphia, surrounding suburbs; Austin, Texas, the city, surrounding suburbs; and then Washington, D.C. / Maryland and Virginia. I head up our life science practice. Prior to that, I oversaw our operations in Pennsylvania from a leasing, property management, business development perspective for X number of years. And as I joke around, I joined the company in the late 1900s, so it shows my vintage. So the focus really right now is growing the life science business. The plain and simple, our product is physical space. Job growth is really what drives the demand for our product. In Austin, Texas, it's clearly been tech. There is an introduction there of life science, certainly with the universities there and new technology. Philadelphia, specifically University City, and Radnor and King of Prussia are hubs for it. So we've got some development projects there we can answer some questions on later. And then down in Rockville, Maryland, we're also converting some buildings down on Research Boulevard right now from traditional office buildings to life science. So we run the gamut from running incubators, so you could be in a single individual renting an office, a workstation, or a lab bench, on up to, we've done facilities as large as 500,000 square feet for specific tenants in the life science side of things.
Great.
That's it.
Thanks, guys. So to kick things off, Jeff, you brought up a good overview of Brandywine's portfolio, and obviously the shift. It seemed like you always were in the life sciences space to some degree, but over the course of the pandemic, Brandywine significantly expanded into the life sciences space. Can you tell us, how that came about and why you started with an incubator in B Labs as kind of the foundation for you to grow this vertical within Brandywine?
Sure. Well, I could joke around. Terry's been doing this a long time too, and it wasn't really a big buzzword with life science. Like we built our first one, which was actually a vaccine facility in King of Prussia in 1998. So,
Wow.
but now it's new. So we labeled it. As Mike talked about, Sears Center, for those of you who aren't familiar, is located next to Amtrak's 30th Street Station. It was a traditional office building that was our first intro into the city, and specifically University City. We responded to an RFP for Amtrak in 2003, delivered it in 2005. Jerry's interest, Jerry Sweeney, the CEO, founder of the company, was interested in being in University City just because we follow job growth, and you knew there were going to be more people living and working in University City tomorrow than today. We originally thought we were going to introduce traditional office buildings, hence Sears Center as a traditional office building, or traditional office users. And that migrated a little bit to tech, and then with the explosion through Dr. Jim Wilson, Carl June, Kate High, everybody, life science was the driver. We have a development project there in joint venture with Drexel, where we can build, called 6 million square feet of lab, residential, and retail. When Jerry started that, the model was very different. So at the 6 million square feet, it was probably 4 million at one time of office, 1 million of residential, and 1 million of retail. It's completely reversed itself. It's, call it 4 million square feet of life science, 1.5 million, 2 million square feet of residential, and a small component of retail. And I don't say that as a commercial, but it gives you a perspective on our view. So what Mike teed up for us was, why did you convert Sears Center and why did you do an incubator? And so we took the lower third of the building and converted that to life science use. That's roughly about 200,000 feet. So as vacancies exist or tenants roll over, we've been moving in life science companies. We're a little bit different than most landlords in that we have a significant investment in this area. So we really have to look at ourselves as almost an economic development organization as well. Most landlords probably would have just taken 200,000 feet, found a big tenant and locked into it, and had a long-term lease and locked it away. What we saw an opportunity was to put an incubator there. So when it's, planting seeds in a field, they will grow and be part of the ecosystem. So we teamed up with a company by the name of PA Biotech out of Doylestown, who had a long history, 15 years, produced over 200 different companies through their system, and created probably $7 or $8 billion worth of market capitalization. Very few people know about them unless you're in that world. What a tremendous opportunity for this region from a growth perspective, but they never really able to capture those companies when they grew and spun out. So we opened up in January this year, 240 seats, 190 lab benches, 35 workstations, 15 private offices. We sent information out to 7,000 companies, called 3,000 of them, spoke to 300 of them, issued proposals for 39, and selected 12 companies. And 12 of those companies, both from a number of companies and the 240 seats, 42% of those companies were from outside the area or looking at other markets along the East Coast. So we really looked at it as an opportunity, vetting through the process with PA Biotech, to select the right science, the right teams, sprinkle those people in this ecosystem. And if you believe everything they're going to say, they're going to grow somewhere between 250 and 350,000 feet over the next 24 to 36 months. So our model there was, it's not the highest real estate return in the short term, but we think for this region, it really provides a great platform for growth. So, and so the reason we really did it was to help build the ecosystem that when we look across the country is so important to all these different organizations. So that was really the mission and the goal. And then we're slowly converting the other floors into graduate type spaces. So as you move up in size, you can go up there. And if you become even bigger, you can do full floors and above in one of the buildings that we're either under construction or building in the future. And I think having that ability to go from one bench to 1 million feet was really what attracted people to this region, and specifically University City.
Great. So I think you both have the unique perspective in that you're doing business in multiple markets across the country and within the life sciences space. And I think you both have had the advantage of seeing the other ecosystems that exist in, Boston, RTP, San Diego. What really, what's the main driver? What makes Philadelphia attractive compared to some of those other markets?
Well, I can take a shot. I mean, we work both in Boston, and we actually went to North Carolina because our clients were going there. And I'd say to Jeff's point is, we're competing not only nationally but globally for these tenants, right, and these companies. And we found that, typically even outside companies, say from Sweden or Israel or something, they'll be looking at Boston, they'll be looking at Philadelphia, also should say Maryland too. I mean, we're working down there for several biotechs, and the AstraZeneca's down there, but smaller biotechs, and then the market in North Carolina. And so I think if you take Cambridge as a good example, Cambridge is a very expensive place to live, but it's attracted by the universities there, and like major pharma and startup companies have gone there, and we're competing with them now. The benefit to Philadelphia in some ways as a Philadelphian is, it's a less expensive place to live. You also have to have the workforce available. So I think companies are looking for, is the talent pool going to be in the right area? And I think that's something that Philadelphia is going to get out front of. I think we've been slow in promoting, the fact that we have 40 universities and within 30 miles or something like that, and getting ourselves branded as a center. Certainly, I think North Carolina has done a very good job of that. And so I guess at that point, and Jeff, you see the tenants on the, and Mike on the commercial side, what they're looking for is space and cost. And I would just say on the construction side, we did a comparison last year for one of our clients who was looking for CGMP manufacturing as they spin out. We looked at the North Carolina market for construction, Philadelphia market, and Atlanta. Atlanta was cheaper by about, benchmark 15% than Philadelphia. North Carolina was very similar. So I think the construction costs weren't that different. So Jeff, that's sort of my take at a high level.
Sure. No, I would pick up on that, echo what Terry said, and add a couple things. And here's what we're hearing from our customers, right? As I mentioned, the 39 different companies that we issue proposals for, we probably could have done deals with 36 or 37 of them. 28 of those were all looking up and down the East Coast. Their first goal, like life science companies make a discovery, they raise money, and then within 30 to 90 days, they have to be in some space. So I think first a gating issue for them is availability. So where is available space, which makes them a little bit more open to different markets across the country. But I think where Philadelphia scored well in our discussions with them was interesting, was exactly what Terry pointed, which is labor. And I think what was interesting that I hadn't heard before until recently was an attrition rate. So, for example, one scientist used to be in Philadelphia, went down to the Triangle for the last 18 months, could not find the talent that they wanted for their specific research organization. They certainly could have gone to Boston, well-financed, very seasoned team. They chose Philadelphia over Boston and San Francisco for very specifically what they deemed as an attrition rate. So if they had 100 employees, they would fully expect 20 or 30 of those to be poached in either Boston or San Francisco. So from an operational perspective, that's exhausting. It's time consuming. It's expensive to bring on 20, 30 people a year out of 100 and know you have to go out and headhunt and steal for that. So that was kind of a gating issue they didn't want to get into. Two, as Terry mentioned, the universities here. We have 80 universities, 400,000 students, almost 90,000 students graduating every year. So there's a new talent pool. But what was interesting to me was the third data point, which was the existing labor pool, which is, a lot of these young startups and life scientists are foreign nationals. They have the flexibility to move wherever the money is or the science is in different cities. They don't have the traditional stickiness of the employee who lives in a community and doesn't want to move. Because of Philadelphia's rich history, both from an educational institution, the hospital network, and more importantly, the pharma network, there's a large base of scientists here or people in that industry that are wanting to stay here. And interesting, the timing of it was interesting. There's, the Roches and the Glaxos and the Mercks, they've been here for a while. So that labor pool's a little older now, a little bit more willing to take risks. Their families, their kids are all grown up now. They have ideas. Maybe they're tired of a big institution or willing to just take some risk in their lives because they're at that stage. And they viewed the ex-pharma employee or current pharma employee base as a really ripe opportunity for talent who people might be interested in startups and new organizations. So it's all about labor. I think cost is some of it, but I think it's really just a question of, do you have the space available? We score incredibly well from a labor pool perspective, but I think the challenge for this market right now is to gain the scale, to get enough companies here and enough supporting resources like manufacturing, like vivariums, and things like that, so that it does to get to a certain scale that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of growth. Where, if you're in tech, you have to be in San Francisco. 10 years ago, you didn't have to be in Austin where we are. Now you have to be. So if we get a little bit more scale here, then you'll have to be here as part of it.
Makes sense. So from drilling down into the kind of the planning stages of the real estate process. Can you guys tell us a little bit about the process of actually, looking for space? What a company needs to do to get started, timing associated with the tenant taking their own lab. Where does a tenant start once they've decided they need to take their own standalone lab?
Well, I could just start with what are you looking for? How do you find out how much it is? So we have a thing called programming. Some of you may be familiar with that. And basically, simply, we're trying to find out what your space needs are. So if we took from a gross level, maybe if on a company level you have so many people, maybe you're going to need 300 or 400 square feet per person, and say 250 square feet for a lab. But we're going to want to understand your program needs. That's the space you need to do your work, and the size of that space, and then the relationships of those spaces to each other, and the kind of culture you want. So the first thing is, if you're starting out, is you kind of do an initial space programming plan, which we would say, okay, you have 20 people, how many people in the lab, what spaces do they require, what's the support spaces they require, and the office support spaces, and then more importantly, what do you think your growth is going to look like? And around that, we can put a square footage together that says, I'm going to need, this year I need 10,000 square feet, but I think in 2 years I'm going to need 30,000 square feet or 50. And then in 5 years, I may need manufacturing. So you want to get a handle on that size of that space. Then that's kind of what we call the program for space. And then I turn over to Jeff or Mike and say, now we have a space requirement. We have certain uses in that space. We have certain mechanical requirements. And we would go, Jeff, where can we put that space, or Mike, right? And maybe you guys can pick up on, now we have a space. How do we look for space in the market? Jeff, you want to handle that one, or Mike?
Yeah, I'm the last to know out of this group, right?
Okay. Or
They
Mike,
talk to Terry
Mike,
first, or talk to Mike. So, Mike, why don't you want to respond to that?
Absolutely. I think engaging an architect and architectural and engineering firm is key, right? Getting an understanding of the overall needs, understanding what where the growth is going to be down the line, and building out a strategy and a program to accommodate that growth. And so number one is figuring out what the needs are, working with a good architecture and engineering firm. The other piece of it too is building out the team, right? So getting a tenant rep or commercial real estate life sciences advisor to represent you in creating leverage in the marketplace. So once you've defined your needs, defined ultimately what your goals are and what your physical space should look like once you find it and build it out, you enter the market. You always want to go out. You want to meet with all the various owners in the area, test the downtown market, test the suburban marketplace, and then start negotiating, send out requests for proposals to each of the landlords. And as you go through the process and go on the physical tours of the spaces, it'll become pretty apparent what's the right fit for your company based on your needs, your culture, the access to certain ecosystem, or being surrounded by certain types of complementary tenants, if you will. And so it once you go through the process, a short list of 2 or 3 properties should rise to the top pretty quickly. And so going through the process of negotiating that, fine-tuning the plans, the construction pricing with the architect, engineer, the contractor on your team is kind of the appropriate way to go forward. And obviously once you zero in on the property, negotiating that through your broker is the approach to take. But creating a competitive environment, building out your team of experts that are familiar with life sciences space and design, engineering, and then entering the market, creating a competitive environment for your business, and then partnering with the right landlord, whether it's Brandywine Realty Trust or whoever it may be, because it's a big capital investment on behalf of the landlord, on behalf of the tenant, and you want to make sure that it's the right fit and is going to position your company to do well and prosper.
Yeah.
And I would, okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Terry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so part of our process is we get that program, and then say Mike has identified 3 spaces. We do what we call a test fit. We take your program and we create a design. It's not a full design. It's, where the labs, the offices, the receiving areas, and so forth. And we'll lay it out and see how it works for that building. And the building may have advantages, disadvantages. It may have no mechanical systems. It may have fully robust mechanical systems. And then we do that. It's called a test fit, and we can see how it looks. And you get a feel for what it would be like. And then you can do the numbers on it and make a decision then based on, it seems to fit well, but what's the cost to fit it out? What's the cost to rent it? And then you can look at all those things together. So that's part of the process. And then, Jeff, sorry.
I think,
Yeah.
No. I think just to pick up on that on a broader perspective, three basic questions that used to come up when you were looking for office space. Where does the decision maker live? How old are their kids? Because they decide how long their commute, where do they go to school, and where's their golf club? And that would kind of zero in on where the location was. And they were able to make commitments for office space because it's a very generic platform for extended periods of time. In the life science set of things, those three questions are: when can you actually get me in?
Right. Speed
Who else is here? Because they want community. And third one is, what happens when my business needs change? How can I pivot around in your portfolio? And I say that because it's impossible. I mean, I don't want to make assumptions, but who in this call can predict what their business is going to be like 10 years from now or 15 years from now?
Yeah.
You have no idea. It's impossible. The only reason that these leases go that length is because the amount of capital it takes to build them out, you have to just amortize it over a longer period. That dynamic's changing a little bit, so we as landlords need to be much smarter so that we build these spaces out so they're almost like apartments. They can be reused without much change. But I think, where I was going with it was, I think the ability to able to provide multiple options for users over the course of their ups and downs in their portfolio is a critical need going forward, because the length of term, the length of commitment that people can make for physical space is going to get less and less over time. So owners need to be more strategic, I think, in their portfolios and offer kind of a cradle to grave opportunity and a pretty broad bandwidth and a different geography approach. I think users have to be much more flexible or much more communicative in what their basic needs are, so that landlords can kind of build that product around them so it's flexible and usable. But I think, that opportunity to react to business, grow, new acquisitions, sell, fail, that portfolio has to be, that review of that portfolio has to be a critical part of that decision. I mean, I'll give you two quick examples. We have two companies from out of state who recently came into this market, who came in looking for a certain amount of space, but changed that, actually increased it because of two things. One, the talent pool they were able to secure, and two, they saw not just Brandywine, but other landlords with an ability to provide physical space over time as their business changed. Much different than what they'd been able to get in, let's just say, a Southern California market or Boston. So I think it's you gotta be flexible and be ready to accommodate all their needs.
In terms of, we talked about flexibility and accommodating growth. What are some of the things that you're seeing in the marketplace? So how, you mentioned B Labs, you mentioned, the graduate space that you're providing. From a landlord's perspective and from a design perspective, from, Terry, how are companies designing their space to provide growth? How are landlords, you're talking about flexibility. What are some of the things that you're offering in terms of to provide this flexibility? And then the other issue is it's a kind of a three-part question, right? You need growth, flexibility, but then a lot of these companies that are early stage they're not cash flow positive, right? And so credit becomes an issue. So how are you providing the growth, given the flexibility, but also, you know, understanding the risk associated with working with companies that are, you know, essentially in the startup phase?
Is that for Terry or for me or both?
Well,
Or how do you want to start?
Combination of both.
Well, let me do the physical part first, because there's the economic part. So let's say, you know, when you take a technical space like a laboratory and you say, I want to have a flexible space. So there's, and especially on cost, there's implications. So flexibility may be, I want to have every service available, every lab gas service available everywhere. That's very flexible, but it's very costly. So if you're a startup, and when we see two things in the lab design, so flexibility, for instance, I can have everything on wheels and have ceiling mounted services, so I can move things around in the future, and it's very flexible. That casework comes with a 25%, you know, premium over, say, a fixed bench, but it does let you change it in the future. So you have to say to yourself, you know, what's my first cost and how much am I going to change and how valuable that is to me. And also, I think even from a landlord viewpoint is, if my first cost is important, I'm not going to put every service in I think I may need in the future. I'm going to have the ability to do that later. And that becomes a very much a design element to say, I want to be able to add these services later, or add a fume hood or more biosafety cabinets. And if there's, for instance, in a lab, if you have a research biosafety cabinet, that's just the cost of the hood. If I start adding more exhausted biosafety cabinets or fume hoods, it affects my air systems. So that's just sort of some physical design things that involve flexibility. And then I would say on the office side, we're seeing, you know, the historical offices and cubes, and are we going to go to activity-based design where I have, you know, for instance, some large pharmaceutical companies like Johnson & Johnson, they have in a lab, they'll say, I have 50 people, I'm going to give seats for 40, I'm going to have these breakout spaces, there's no assigned seating, and so forth. What that means is you can reduce the square footage you need per office space for that laboratory, but there's implications to how you work. So if I need a space where I'm quiet and that's really important to my lab users, then it maybe increase the space. So that's a part we're seeing. And then how hybrid are you? So those are all kind of flexibility concerns that I can turn it over to Jeff to say, then how do you do that from a landlord viewpoint to give them a space or a lease? And maybe Jeff, you can pick up on that. So
Sure. Look, I think the first thing to pick up on Terry's comment is the building structure, the frame has to be really robust, because physical needs are going to change over time. Technology is going to change, and you have to have the basic bones of a structure to be able to adapt to that. So you need wide shaft space, multiple shaft spaces, high slab to slabs, low vibration levels in the slabs, high floor loads. I mean, you have to come up with, you know, a really strong basic building envelope. Where I think I'd say two things. One is, you know, our approach is that we're basically in the apartment business for labs. So we are building this inventory like an apartment owner would. Studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, beyond. So as your family grows, you know, you're single, you're in a studio. You get married, you need a 1 bedroom. You have a baby, you need a 2 bedroom, you know, and on up. So we're pre-building spaces throughout the portfolio set. As the company changes, again, up or down, they can move around. But I think that the interesting dynamic that I think is partially because of COVID is the resources that these lab scientists need are going to be closer in proximity than they used to be. You know, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, if you had a manufacturing facility for your cell and gene therapy organization, whatever you're building, within 90 minutes, that was close enough. Now I think it's got to be closer. And then you've got to have maybe testing manufacturing facilities in that building. Vivariums, there used to be, you know, they're not really primates, most of them. It's more just mice and rats and maybe some butterflies and fish. So I think you're going to see landlords trending towards putting those resources in closer proximity to the buildings are maybe within buildings, so that just like the evolution of the office space, you could have a gym nearby and a restaurant nearby and a conference center nearby, but now all of a sudden it had to be a little closer, and then all of a sudden it has to be within the building. So I think the demands or needs of the tenants are they're going to be wishing that those were closer, and I think you're going to see a trend towards landlords supplying that if they can, and I think those who do will be more successful than those who have not.
I think that also goes for, as you talked about the ecosystem before, that at least the users we talk to, the companies, you want to be in a community. You don't want to be out in some, at least we don't see it in some cornfield someplace. You're completely isolated. You want to be able to walk outside. There's other people of your like mind. There's other services around. And suburbs have some locations that actually provide some community. But I think that ecosystem idea is very important, I think. And we see it's very strong, at least from our experience. So,
did that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, I think that was great.
Yeah. So we have about 20 minutes left. I'd like to take this time and open it up to audience questions, and we have one here from Andrew Lee. And also I think this would be a good time for Mike to pull up a map of the area. His question is, over the next 3 to 5 years, do we expect more life science growth in the city or King of Prussia, Radnor, Malvern suburban area?
Great. So this map here, this shows the life sciences inventory clusters. So, as you can see here, essentially this heat map identifies the existing inventory that we have. It takes out owner-occupied inventory that's lab or GMP. And this is all just third-party space that's leased to existing life sciences tenants or is on the market. So you can see here, Philadelphia, University City. Obviously, there's a lot that's been going on within University City. Well over 1 million square feet of new development. I think it's closer to 2 million square feet that's going to be delivered between now and 2024. And so University City is going to continue to grow. Obviously, there's been other pockets that have been developing and growing over the course of the past couple of years within Philadelphia. So this gives you a sense of the downtown market and some of the clusters that have developed. Obviously, as I mentioned, University City, Schuylkill Yards, which is Jeff's project, continue to grow with Penn, Drexel. We expect continued growth in those marketplaces. Innovation, and then the Navy Yard. Obviously, there's an exciting development with Oxford and Mosaic that was just announced a couple of weeks ago. The partnership there, where well over 1.5 million square feet of space that can potentially be delivered over the next couple of years. And then the two new ones that have come on market, you have the Curtis Center and then 401 North Broad, which is more so spec labs that they've been developing. And so, a lot of development and activity is certainly planned for downtown Philadelphia. But if you look at the suburban market, we have a number of significant projects that have come online, and mainly Discovery Labs with MLP Ventures, and they're pretty close to, or they've reportedly leased the remainder of their space. They just bought about a year and a half ago. They bought the old Inquirer site. They have the ability to do close to 700,000 square feet there. Springhouse Innovation Center. They still have, they've had some good leasing activity there, but they have more space to lease and also have buildable land. And then that same owner, Beacon Capital, just bought the old Gwinnett Mercy site. So they have close to 1 million square feet of buildable land there that they can deliver. So in addition, we've seen a number of new investors to the marketplace come in to start to convert existing buildings, both downtown and in Center City, Philadelphia, University City. Griffith Properties bought Oakland's corporate center out in Exton. They're converting that to life sciences, spec labs, CGMP space. There's also Spalding Sly bought a number of buildings. So we're starting to see a lot of out-of-town capital coming into the marketplace. So we expect, pretty considerable growth in both markets. And then, in terms of the suburbs, Brandywine has 250 King of Prussia Road, which Jeff can touch on. But another exciting redevelopment that's taken place in that marketplace in the heart of the best office market in the Philadelphia suburbs. So I guess to answer your question, there's going to be significant growth in both markets. I think the suburbs is going to have more just because the footprint's bigger, right? And there's more land to build, some more buildings to convert. CGMP is certainly easier to accommodate out in the suburban marketplaces with the existing, industrial and flex market, and buildings that can be more easily converted for manufacturing. Jeff, any?
Yeah, I think maybe I talk a little bit. Look, you did a very thorough review. I think maybe answer it with a little bit of trends. Look, you've seen a lot of leases being done in a pretty wide geographic area over the last 3 years. I don't think that that's really an indication that one market was really that attractive to somebody. It really just had an issue to do with they had available space at that time. As Mike indicated, and we're notorious in this business, no matter what, we always ruin a good thing and overbuild, whether or not it's residential or office or industrial or life science, and we will do that to ourselves at some point. I think the general theme is this. If you're biology based or med tech, you're probably more urban than suburban. The manufacturing, other than early stage testing, will most likely be done in the suburbs or in the city as it relates to the Navy Yard, Pennovation, or some other location. If you're in the chemistry-based end of things or pharma, you probably could go some city, but you'll probably end up more in a suburban location. And you got to remember, people are people, right? There's some people who like urban environments and some people who like suburban environments. So that's part of it. And then two, it's really the lead scientists, so like, it's amazing. Like Dr. Jim Wilson, the spin outs from his lab have generated over $15 billion in market cap.
Wow.
Alone. So you're going to see people gravitate around that center of excellence for cell and gene therapy about an urban environment because the pioneers are there. And, Jim's just, one of many. But in the reverse, in the pharmacology world, those rock stars or icons are primarily based in more of the suburban markets. But so I think that kind of theme and trend is going to be more pronounced, and that if, just like anything else, if you can find a house on the beachfront, you're going to buy it. If you can't, you're going to go at another location. And as soon as one becomes available, you're going to move back. So I think what we've seen in the past is not necessarily an indication of where we think people will locate in the future, given an opportunity.
All right, thank you for that. We have here another question from the audience. Is what kind of pain points occur when relocation planning begins?
How that one, Terry? You deal with it every day.
When relocate, so say that again, relocate, or when you're trying to get a new location. Oh, okay, so I would say one of the pain points we see is the ability of your company to decide what you're going to do. And we've seen that as a pain point, getting consensus on what's our program, how much we're going to build, what's it going to be, what's the culture going to be like, what's the design going to be like, so we can actually implement a study to where it goes. And we've seen that as a start-stop on, if you're on a fast timeline, that's a key thing we've seen in terms of pain, I think, in getting that consensus among a company that's, and a lot of times you're a startup company, you're just feeling your way on that thing. So that's one of the, I guess, the larger issues we see from our viewpoint, if that makes sense. And I guess from the, I'm not sure the other pain that would come after that, but any Jeff or Mike?
Yeah, look, I think you covered it. I think people have difference of opinions. I can give you two examples where, one group wants everybody to be in one facility.
Yep.
And another group doesn't want to be in one facility because a suburban location is better for their component of lab or manufacturing. And, it comes down to people too. Sometimes people don't want to make commutes. It's those kind of soft pieces. And I think the other challenging piece is it's easy to make a decision when all the answers line up well with your needs. It's very difficult when you don't have a perfect solution for all your problems. So then you're doing what everybody else does. You triage and you prioritize. And that's a really challenge. And then I think, right now, supply chain is the other issue. That'll get solved at some point, but it doesn't seem like it's going to clear up for a while.
I would say that we've had a recent the same thing, a client saying, do I have everything under one roof in manufacturing? And I want to be, in the city, or the people in manufacturing, because, I think one of the important things, if you're doing clinical trials and it's a smaller scale facility, that's really easier to handle at almost any location. As you begin to grow more, then where does that fit? And that discussion about internally, should I have manufacturing in a suburb, in the city, or separate under one roof? That's a fundamental decision. That's pretty important when you're trying to design a facility. So
yeah, and look, there's practical sides to it. Like you're selling gene therapy, you have so much time to take blood out of a patient and create a vector. That manufacturing facility may be any place in the country. So you have to physically get it there, drive it, or fly it to wherever it needs to be, and be back in a certain time frame. That's a lot. That's a heavy lift. And these people have a lot of decisions to make so that they can have a smooth delivery of their product for years to come.
I would say another pain point is, and we're seeing that with a couple of our clients is, you've got your clinical trial, you have a CDMO, right? So you come to the fork in the road saying, I've got through discovery, I'm going to go phase 1 trials, fine, but phase 2, 3 trials, do I go to a CDMO? Now the problem CDMO's been having are this capacity and cost, right? But sometimes it's just capacity that they're completely booked.
Yeah.
So, we were working on a project where the client decided to make their own vector facility because not for cost, but for timing. They couldn't get in the queue in order to do this. So these are kind of the points of pain, I guess, where as a company, where do you decide to go? How virtual will you be? How much are you going to rely on a CDMO on that next phase? And there's a big capital implication if you don't.
It's a race. I mean, 10 to 20 companies out of 100 who make it through all 3 phase 1, 2, and 3 trials go to commercialization.
Yep.
By the time they might get there, somebody else may have already come up with it, or you found out it's not reimbursable, or you found out that there wasn't enough demand. So this is literally just a race. So I think the biggest gating issue is just pace of play and speed, and able to get all those resources lined up so that whoever you're competing against, you can be successful. Or quite frankly, we all lose sight of it. But more importantly, the race to solve a patient's problem, which is really why these people are in this business.
Exactly.
They don't look at it as a race to a competitor. They literally look at it as a race to saving a life. It's such a noble cause versus what we at our firm do. I think that's a real driver, and it's the things that they need to solve for. But that's what Terry, Mike, myself do. We try and solve these people's problems.
So I think we have time for one last question before wrapping up. Last one is, how does a physical space drive culture, collaboration, and productivity within an organization?
Oh, wow. I'll take a shot at that. So, well, for instance, how you design your space. I'll give an example. For instance, we do a lot of laboratories where we'll have a full glass wall between the laboratory and the workspace. Now, here's a cultural thing. So we think that's great because everybody can see each other. And here's a cultural thing. So if I do that, we recently had a client say, well, maybe that scientist is like in a fishbowl. I don't really like that. So, it's how you're working. And You know, the same for office spaces. You know, this activity-based design is great. People have open desks, but can you do your work as a scientist where you can't concentrate on something? So we don't like to come in with preconceived ideas about how to work. We like to understand how you work. And then the design of the spaces, you know, what's it going to look like, for instance? And the way we understand that is we'll show you pictures of different spaces. Like, is it natural light important to you? Well, we think it is to most people, but some people maybe not. And so that physical design, the same way we're talking about how bench design works. So you get the functional aspects of it, and then how do you increase collaboration and communication? There was a really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times about 3 months ago about a scientist at Penn. This was about some early vector work, and they said they were talking at the print machine, the Xerox machine in the building at Penn, and I have a copy of the article someplace, and they were talking about something, and it was like, aha, this is what we can do, and it led to some discovery thing, and it was a great article. And so we always, as architects, like to say, how do I make those spaces where that coffee machine or wherever I'm going to talk to you, you run into each other, and that collaboration occurs? Is it a whiteboard? So that's what drives us to see if it's successful. And we have to. Another client said, you know, I sketch on, you know, I'm doing equations as a chemistry a project, just old Cephalon project, and we do stuff on our fume hoods. That's where we communicate to other people, and they walk by and say, well, what you're doing. So we want to understand where that collaboration is going to occur to help encourage it. So that
look, we're big believers in it. You know, there's so much talk right now about, do I even need an office to do my job? Can I just do it anywhere I am, a coffee shop, my house, in a bedroom? And we're just big proponents of physical space creates culture and outcomes.
Absolutely.
And I'll give you a couple of quick analogies, right? Like when people went out to visit a college campus or a high school campus, or a venue for a wedding, whatever it is, they go out there and they get a feel for that experience and how that's going to make or break the outcome of whatever decision they're going to make. We think going to your office, whether or not that's lab, office, manufacturing, is that same kind of thought process.
Yeah.
And it can change the trajectory of an organization. And for those people who don't believe that being in the office is a necessary evil going forward, just had a conversation with a manager of a law firm who's trying to figure this out. Big law firm, several hundred employees. Do I bring people back? Do I don't? And the conversation kind of went like this, like, look, you're now the managing partner of this organization. If you 30 years ago had worked remotely, would you have had the opportunity to gain the skills, the network, the mentoring, all the different businesses that you've led if you were really just working at home? Or, and even if you did, would you have known enough of the people in your own organization to have them vote you in that position? So I think it's pretty short. It's not for every organization, but we just do believe that physical space inspires people. And as Terry touched on, if it's designed well and those people are able to get engaged in conversations and come up with new ideas, it's going to change the trajectory of your organization. And it's not for every role, but, at least to me, if team A is coming in 3 days a week to the lab or the office or wherever they are, and they're working together, and team B is seeing each other 3 times a quarter, and team C is seeing each other 3 times a year, you might not notice the business trajectory the first year, the results, but you'll see it over time. And look, physical space can be part of that. Everybody walks into it and they're inspired by it. And I think it's, something we're all working towards and don't want to lose sight of. It can change the trajectory of a company or your own career path.
Great.
Well, I appreciate that, guys. Looks like we're about to close out the hour. Before we go, is there any, parting thoughts that you wanted to leave the audience here?
I would just say that, as you growing companies, the process of designing and building out your space is an exciting process. and it's one that you should enjoy doing, and give your thoughts to what it would be like. There was one anecdote. It said it was, if you can think as you go in this process, 2 years from now, you move in your space and you're writing us all a letter. You're going to write us like, why is this building working so well for me, and how did the process go? And maybe that's the place to start when you come back to the beginning. And you can say, I love this space because of this, and I love the process because of this. So that's my kind of parting shot, I guess, or idea. So, Jeff and.
I'm not an inspiring guy, but I just think you got to really focus on what works for you and your organization, and be very thoughtful about the long-term perspective of the decisions you're making. And I just see so many people focusing on the near term that they don't really take a good, they make some decisions that don't really help them in the long term. So think through the process, talk to a lot of different people, get different perspectives, and then you'll make the right decisions along the way for your company, your organization, your physical space, and that'll hopefully carry you forward in a better result than you would have otherwise.
Great.
But thanks for the invitation today.
Yeah.
Hopefully somebody got something out of it.
Hope so.
And Brian, thanks for putting all this together. I know it's not
Thank you.
easy, especially on a sunny Friday.
Yeah, no problem. I'd just like to thank everybody again, especially Mike for putting together this awesome panel, and Jeff and Terry for accepting the invitation,
Absolutely.
as well as the audience for joining us on this Good Friday afternoon. So, so if you have any questions, or if you want to reach out to any of the panelists here, feel free to reach out to me at my email, and the recording will be uploaded on YouTube in about a week or two. And please go on the YouTube channel and subscribe if you want to learn more about other entrepreneurship topics. So thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you all have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.